Hello and welcome to this week's live Tech Talk. Today's presenter is Emma McGrattan, Senior Vice President of Engineering here at Actian. She'll be telling us about our exciting new cloud data warehouse service, Actian Avalanche. With that, I'll hand over to you, Emma.
Great. Thanks, Pradeep. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Actian, let me start by just introducing ourselves. So Actian has built out a portfolio of products and services that enable us to provide capabilities to manage, analyze, and integrate what we call hybrid data. And there can be many aspects to hybrid data, right? So it might be data that's structured versus data that's unstructured. It might be data that's on-premise versus data that's in the cloud. It might be data that's streaming versus data that's batch or data that's at rest. All of these different aspects of hybrid data are the goal at Actian, to manage that, to analyze it, and to integrate it. We've been at this for a long time, right? I personally have over 26 years in the industry, and Actian has been doing this for over 30 years. So we know what it is to support mission-critical data operations. Our customers bet their business on our technologies, and we've got an amazing organization that provides 24/7 support around those mission-critical deployments of our technologies. We're really innovative. We've got a load of patents in the portfolio, and the area in which my team's doing a lot of innovation is in the area of analytics, but Actian also has patents in the area of data integration, data management, and so on. We're a global company. We've got over 300 employees around the world. We've got offices in 15 countries, and we've got a team on the support side of things that is gifted in many different languages, so we can provide 24/7 multinational support with other language options for those for whom English is not their first language. Last year, we were jointly acquired by HCL and Samero Equity Partners, and they have given us a massive reach into their customer base and into their partner base, and it's an exciting time here at Actian. So if we talk about Actian's history in the area of analytics, we've had a long history of innovation. So starting with the first research projects around how do you actually do high performance data analytics. Then we moved on to taking vectorization, first vectorized database solution brought to market, and that really differentiated us in terms of performance. Now what you'll see is everybody that's building out modern data platforms is introducing vectorization as a capability. In the SQL and Hadoop space, we saw that there was a gap in the market for something that could address SQL and Hadoop with performance, and B, the ability to do updating transactions. So the Actian Vector in Hadoop technology was the first that introduced the concept of multi-statement transactions with rollback, true ACID compliance, and we also have the ability to update data in Hadoop in a way that doesn't impact the performance of running queries. So really differentiated on Hadoop. And then the most interesting departure for us is that we are now delivering the capabilities that we've built out in the analytics space as a fully managed service. So Actian Avalanche was released in March of this year, and it's a fully managed cloud data warehouse that draws on Actian's years of experience in managing data-critical, mission-critical deployments. So the reason that we've built it out is that we've seen, when we look across the industry, that there's a big hindrance to business growth in the area of legacy systems being used for enterprise data management. Many of the solutions that we come across as people are talking to Actian about innovating is that when they build out these legacy systems, they're built on technology that was invented in the 70s and 80s. They have a problem with the fact that data is siloed, right? So as they're adopting new applications and new services, what they're finding is that they have these little puddles of data across the organization. Some of them will be, structured database solutions, some of it semi-structured or unstructured data, and then they'll have cloud services that are providing as SaaS applications or cloud service for data storage and backup and so on. Because of these legacy systems were designed in the 70s and 80s, they harken back to a time when memory was very scarce. Disks were very slow and expensive, and CPUs weren't all that fast and had very limited capabilities on board. So what we have seen with the Actian solution set is, because we've built it for a modern architecture, and we're able to take full advantage of all of the capabilities in today's commodity servers. The other thing we see with legacy systems is that they're really expensive to acquire, to implement, to manage, and to monitor, and so on. So when we talk to people about what we're doing at Actian, typically they have problems in their existing infrastructure related to these three aspects of legacy enterprise database deployments. So, well, I mean, we're not the first cloud data warehousing solution, right? The cloud data warehouses came to market to address those challenges. And what they promised was that you'd have the ability to integrate all of your data, right? So that's one of the promises they had, was that you can bring all of that data together. The next was that because you're working with cloud scale, they can easily scale up to petabytes of data and deliver on performance on that large scale data set, right? You pay only for what you use. So in environments where you've got peaky workloads, and that is that you have a regular workload through most of the month. At end of month, you may have some additional processing that's done that's a little heavier on your workload. End of quarter, there's probably a lot more work going on. End of year, it's probably killing your systems. When you're dealing with legacy systems, you've got to build for that peak. When you're dealing with the cloud, you just scale up to meet your specific needs at the busiest time of the year. You'll build for that environment, and then you'll go right back down to what you need the very next day. You also, with cloud solutions, in many of them, you have the ability to pay only for the business hours that you're using it. So let's say you have a very small shop, and you have 9 to 5 use case. You can pay just for what you're using 9 to 5, and then switch the resources off at the end of the day. The next thing that cloud data warehouses promised was that they were going to be really easy to manage. Right? They take the requirement to have skilled database experts on staff and give you the ability to innovate and focus on business differentiation. So this is what the cloud data warehouses promised. What we have seen in reality is that they didn't always deliver on these promises, right? So one area in which we've seen a concern around bringing data to the cloud is data that may be subject to regulatory compliance, right? So in financial services, in situations where you've got PII data, and also in healthcare, we see this reticence to bring that data into the cloud. So if you've decided on a cloud strategy and you've got subsets of your data that cannot move to the cloud, then you wind up with what we're calling these data silos, right? So you wind up having to choose a set of technologies for your on-premise deployment and a different solution for cloud. So that's certainly been a challenge that we've seen. Now, it may be that we talk to many people in financial services and healthcare about this because they have those concerns about moving data into the cloud. But time and again, we hear that a challenge with cloud data warehouses is the fact that you've got to keep some data on-premise, and that can be a real struggle. The next thing that we've seen with the cloud data warehouses is they really struggle with user concurrency. So as we go into organizations that have hundreds and thousands of users that they want to provide with access to the environment, some of them have been burned in the past with the cloud data warehousing solutions that can't deliver performance with that large volume of users, and they wind up with users queuing up for their workload to be executed, and it can also get very expensive to support large numbers of users. So this is another thing that we said, wow, we've got a technology that can address that challenge. And the other thing, the last thing on here that has been a problem with cloud data warehousing has been that it's very, very, very inexpensive to get started, but the prices can amp up very quickly. So we looked at the fact that there is an opportunity here in the market to deliver on a cloud data warehouse that addresses these three areas that the existing cloud data warehousing solutions are struggling with. So that is hybrid data, right? And in this instance, I mean hybrid with data living on-premise in the data center and data that's distributed across multiple clouds. The performance scaling with concurrency, because what we're seeing as we talk to prospects is what we call this democratization of analytics. They want to provide everybody in the organization that's making business decisions with the tools that they need to make those decisions. So they want to give all hundreds of users access to the data set, and they want them to be able to do ad hoc querying, right? So I don't want to run canned reports because my data needs are very different to somebody who's running, let's say, the HR department. So I want the freedom to be able to write my own ad hoc queries and my own dashboards and reports. So providing that level of concurrency is something we do really well. And then ours is a very predictable pricing model. So we've built Actian Avalanche to deliver on those three areas in which the incumbents in the cloud data warehousing space are struggling today. So what is Actian Avalanche? Well, we've taken all of the innovation that Actian's known for in the area of data analytics, data management, and data integration, and we're delivering this as a cloud data warehousing service that's really differentiated, and we're going to talk about that in greater detail. The next thing is that we're delivering it as a managed service, and where that becomes really attractive is you don't have to have any skills around the data management side of things. We're handling all of that work for you. So whether it's administration of the database environment, whether it's securing that data, making sure that only the people that are supposed to have access to data have access to it, all of that is being managed for you by Actian. And then the third thing with Actian Avalanche is we're delivering it on a pay-as-you-go model. So if, for instance, you have an environment in which your analysts are only accessing the data during the U.S. business day, right, which will span 8 a.m. Eastern, let's say, to 6 p.m. On the Pacific coast, you could pay only for usage during that environment, or during those working hours. You also may want to switch things off at the weekend, right? Maybe nobody's touching the system at the weekend, so why would you pay for it? And so we give you that flexibility to shut the resources down when they're not in use, the compute resources. So we've also designed it to be incredibly simple. So we can get you to production in a matter of 3 simple steps. So the first is that you create your Avalanche cluster. And I'm going to go into a little more detail on this in the coming slides. So creating this cluster is very straightforward. The next step is loading your data, and we have built into Avalanche support for all of the tools that we come across for data loading in our customer base. So it may be something that you've decided to use Spark for data movement. That's certainly something that is supported and that works incredibly fast. But you may also have tools like Informatica, or you may have some of the Actian technologies in your environment as well. Whatever it is that you've chosen to use for loading the data into the environment, we're providing support for that. So loading your data is the second step. And then the third step is you're then at a point where you can start analyzing your data. And we have provided support for all of the tools that we come across most commonly, right? So it's tools like Looker, Tableau, Power BI, Qlik. We see a lot of people writing with Python and Spark and R, and we've provided support for all of these, as well as open standard support. So anything that can connect to a data source through ODBC, JDBC, or .NET is also supported. So 3 simple steps: create the cluster, load your data, start your analysis. And we believe that we can get you from that very first step of creating the cluster through to analyzing your data in as little as 20 minutes. It's completely dependent upon the size of your environment and the volume of data that you're loading, but it can be done in as little as 20 minutes to get you started. So let's take a look at what it takes to build out a production system. So the first step that you do is you come into the Actian environment and create a cluster. So to create a cluster, the first thing you provide is a name for that cluster. And what you'll see here is that for the purposes of the demonstration today, I've chosen that as BrightTalk. The next step is you choose the region that makes sense for you for locating your data set. So I've chosen Ireland. It's where I'm from, and I've got a lot of affection for Ireland. So I've chosen that as the region in which I want to store my data. And the next thing you choose is the cluster size. So I've chosen 8 Avalanche units. I'm storing about 4 terabytes of data, and that's going to fit very comfortably in my 8 Avalanche units. And then the last thing on here is to secure the environment. You provide your whitelist IP address. I'll be honest, I didn't know what my whitelist IP address was, and there's a little button that I can click on there that will actually populate that for me, so I don't need to know what that is. So in this way, we can identify exactly the size of cluster where we want it located and give it a name, give that initial IP address that can access it, and then I go off and create my cluster. Now, behind the scenes, there's hundreds of things going on, right? But it's very much like a swan, right? It's all very elegant on the front end, and furiously under the covers, Actian is doing all of that work for you. Once you've created that cluster, that is a production-capable cluster. There's nothing stopping you at that point loading your production data and running your queries against it. In terms of sizing the cluster, that's something that we will help with, but typically what we'll say is that 8 AUs is our smallest cluster. An AU is an Avalanche unit, and that's good for managing about a half a terabyte of compressed data. Compression ratios vary, and they're very much data dependent, but a good rule of thumb is that you'll get about a 4-to-1 compression ratio. So that that 8 AU cluster at 4 terabytes of compressed data would be good for about 16 terabytes of raw data. So that's the first step, right? Getting your cluster created. Once the cluster is created, if we zoom in to the left of the console, it's got pretty much everything that you need now for accessing that cluster. So the first menu item here, clusters, gives you a list of the clusters that you've created and that you want to manage. The second menu item, drivers and tools, connects through to the ESD system that we have at Actian, and from there you can download the JDBC and ODBC drivers that you will need to connect to Actian Avalanche. Below that, we have our documentation link. So when you come into the documentation, and our documentation site is publicly available, so you don't have to have a subscription to access that. And when you go into the documentation, it will give you everything that you need to get started with Actian Avalanche. We recognize the fact that not everybody has a demo data set that they're ready to start working with. So we've actually pre-populated Actian Avalanche with a year's worth of flight information data. So this is a publicly accessible data set, and it's populated in the database already. We also, as part of Avalanche documentation, have provided you with a set of really interesting queries that you can use to analyze that data. So if you want to get started, you don't even have to think about, well, what data do I want to use? What queries do I want to use? We've pre-populated with some really interesting data and some queries that allow you to show off your skills in building out visualization tooling and dashboards and so on. Beneath the documentation link, you'll see our Need Help link. And this is for the people that, like myself, don't particularly care to read documentation. And if you need help, you can search for help on a given topic. So it might be something like, well, how do I connect Looker to Avalanche? Or, what are some of the things I need to be aware of for setting up Power BI, accessing Avalanche? That's all in there. And we've got a combination of knowledge-based documents where we go step by step through screenshots of the process that you need to connect these tools. We also have some videos in there. So if you wanted to look at a video, and that's my preferred way of following along, and that's something that we've provided for as well. So making it really simple to get started and providing you with, in the Actian Avalanche console, everything that you need to be successful with Actian Avalanche. So we have, when people are moving to cloud, we hear security. It's a really interesting topic because you've got some people that are moving to cloud because they like the security that cloud offers, and sometimes they'll cite the data breaches that have happened in the past in large organizations because they haven't applied the latest patches or they don't have the best practices in place for cloud security. And what this community of users are telling us is that they trust that Amazon and Microsoft and Google are going to handle security better than their own people can. So they see security as a driver for moving to the cloud. But we also hear about people that are concerned about moving to the cloud. And when I talked earlier about the fact that Actian's built out a hybrid capability, it's to address that challenge, right? That some people want to keep certain data on-premise and they're a little reticent in moving sensitive data to the cloud. So we've built a solution that can address both of those use cases. Actian Avalanche is designed to be very secure, right? So you can control who can access it, and you control through providing a list of whitelist IP addresses at where they can access that from. So that's entirely on you. If you look to the right at the very simple graphic, right, your company can have access to, it's a single tenant deployment, so only your data is in this instance, and nobody else in the rest of the world can access that. All data in Actian Avalanche is encrypted. So whether that's data in motion, that's the result set that's coming from the query that you issue to get your report of your top 10 most important customers that you need to talk to today, that's going to be encrypted right the way up until it hits your device, right? You also have the fact that we are encrypting all data at rest. So you can rest assured that the data within Avalanche, as it's sitting on disks in the cloud and cloud storage, is encrypted at rest. We can work with a multitude of authentication mechanisms. So when you want to authenticate through Kerberos or Active Directory or LDAP, we have the ability to integrate with those technologies. So we will work with you on whatever the best authentication mechanism is for you to make sure that the user that is accessing the data within Avalanche is indeed who they say they are. We also can provide for discretionary access control. So through the SQL grant statement, we can say who can access what within the database. So that will be, who can read, write, and update. And we have group, role, and user level security. So depending upon the level of granularity you require, we have all of that built into Actian Avalanche. We also have the ability to turn on auditing. So you can audit all activities within the database. So let's say you wanted to make sure that people were not attempting to access data sets that they shouldn't be attempting to access. So an example would be, if I were trying to find out who at Actian got paid out what bonus, right? I shouldn't be attempting to access that data. The fact that I've attempted to access it can actually trigger a security alarm. So we can set the very complex security mechanisms in place, but the basic security model is that all of the data is encrypted at rest and in motion, and we limit access to the IP addresses that you've told us to, and to the users that you want to access to it. And we also have the ability to support data masking. So if you have sensitive data, let's say it's credit card numbers, and you want to mask all of the values within that credit card number up until the last 4 digits, and maybe you represent them all as X's until those last 4 digits, we have the ability to provide for that data masking capability. So for unauthorized users, they see the masked value. For authorized users, they can see the raw data. So Actian Avalanche is built to be a very secure solution, recognizing the fact that the people have real data concerns and data security concerns, and with the advent of laws like GDPR in Europe, it's really important that we have the ability to address all of the requirements that are put on PII and PMI data. So getting back to managing the cluster, so this bright talk cluster that I've created for the purposes of illustration for today's webcast is now has been created and is running in the environment. You'll see that little green box there that says this is a running cluster. To the right of that, there's a menu that's titled Manage, and when I drop down that menu, you'll see that I can stop the cluster, I can delete the cluster, I can connect to the cluster, I can set access to my S3 buckets, so that I can pull data from S3 into the cluster. I can set the connection password for this particular cluster, and I can manage the IP address list that I want to have on my whitelist. So all of that is available within this one very simple menu. But let's look at Connect, right? Because once I have established the cluster and it's running, the first thing I'll want to do is to connect to it. It may be that I want to run some queries from the documentation where I mentioned that we have that data set preloaded, or maybe that I want to connect so that I can load my own data. So to connect to the Avalanche cluster, when you bring up that connection box, it lists out all of the different URLs and connection strings that you would require to connect to the Avalanche, to your particular Avalanche instance. So this is pre-populated with everything that you'll need to know. I didn't capture it on the screenshot here on the right, but to the right of each of these connection string URLs, as I hover over it, it will actually give me the ability to copy that connection string to my clipboard. So then when I go into my tool like Looker, I can just paste that connection string in there, and I'm ready to connect, right? I can test that connection and start using it right away. So it's a really simple, how do I connect to the environment? It provides for the connection of JDBC, ODBC, applications. And also, if your preference is to use a command line interface, maybe that's your preferred way of interacting with your data set, there is also the ability to do that through our CLI connection strings. So they're all there. They're ready to use, to copy, to paste into the tool, and they're pre-populated with the host name, the ports that are required, the object name. So this is the database instance, the user you're connecting as, any properties of the connection string. So as I mentioned earlier, encryption is turned on by default. So you may need, for JDBC, as part of that connection string, it will say encryption equals on. But it's all there for you. We've taken all of the guesswork out of it and making this as simple to use as possible. We want you to be successful, and anything that might have been kind of a little blip on that journey to success, we've attempted to address with Actian Avalanche. So now you know how to connect to your environment. The next thing is ingesting data. So we've got multiple different ways of ingesting data into Avalanche, and what we find is that most Avalanche opportunities deal with large volumes of data, and when you're dealing with large volumes of data, you'd certainly want to parallelize that load task as much as you can, and we've got the ability to do that. We've got a Spark loader that comes with Actian Avalanche that gives you the ability to do a very fast ingestion of large volumes of data by parallelizing that as much as possible. And we also in the portfolio have a capability called Actian Data Flow, and that also can do a really good job of parallelizing data load. And we support all of the common ETL tools and CDC tools that people may be using. So those too can be used to ingest data into Actian Avalanche. And then streaming, we do see people want to use streaming data, land that data in Avalanche for deep analytics purposes, and we have the ability to land that data through Kafka into Actian Avalanche. In terms of the granularity of updates and of loads, we support batch updates. If you want to go with mini batches or micro batches, that's certainly a method that we see used a lot. As I mentioned already, you can use streaming data and land that in Avalanche. And then change data capture. So if you're using a replication solution and you want to make sure that the data within Avalanche reflects what's happening within your business at that moment in time, right? So a real-time view of your data, that's something that we can provide through change data capture solutions like HVR and Achinity for use with Avalanche. If you want to load your data from AWS, or maybe you've got it sitting in some S3 buckets on AWS, we have the ability to do that through an external table, right? So let's say you have a Parquet file that's sitting on S3 and you want to load the contents of that Parquet file into Actian Avalanche. You can set that Parquet file up as an external table, and then you can do a create table as select from that external table, or it may be that you actually don't want to ingest the data. Maybe you just want to join the data from that Parquet file with the data that's in Avalanche, and we have the ability to use external tables in that way as well. We do see with Parquet files all of the time that it starts with, well, I don't want to load that data, I don't want to have a second copy of the data, but once they see the performance characteristics that Actian Avalanche can deliver, they very quickly decide they want to get this into Actian Avalanche and take full advantage of the performance that we can deliver. We support ETL and as well as ELT environments, right? We're seeing a trend away from ETL and more into the, load the data and then use the analytics and compute power that Avalanche can deliver to actually do the transformation process when the data is already landed. So ETL endpoints is something that we support, and we can preserve the investment that you've made in your ETL and your ELT jobs today by providing support for all of the most commonly encountered tools. Getting data out of Avalanche, something that that's probably the next step, right? So you've created your cluster, you've loaded your data, and now you want to get something out of it. So to the top right-hand corner of the slide here, what you'll see is that we have support for all the most commonly encountered BI and analytics tools. And if there's something that you're using that's not on the list here, it's only because my little bubble here is so small that I couldn't include the entire list of environments that we'll work with. But the ones that we see most commonly would be Looker, Tableau, Power BI, Qlik, and Excel. We see quite a bit of that as well. So these are all toolings that we provide support for. And as I mentioned already, ODBC, JDBC, and Spark connectors are part of Actian Avalanche, as you have the ability to connect through those data sources. So if you wanted to actually unload the data, right, so egress data from here, we've got multiple ways of doing that. You can do a parallel unload, so you could use Spark for that. We've got the ability to use ETL and actually extract data from Avalanche for whatever reason. And then the analytic tools are probably the ones that we encounter most often, right? People want to take a look at subsets of their data, and they'll use ETL tools for that. For the data scientists, we provide ODBC, JDBC support, and we see a ton of people using Python. We see, Jupyter notebooks being used against Avalanche. We see Scala and OR. So, providing support for those tools that we'll encounter there was important to us as well. So that's all there. And then if you wanted to do an unload to S3 for whatever reason, and we've got the ability to do that again through the external table. So you could, insert into that external table from an Avalanche table. So lots of ways of getting data out of Avalanche as well. And because Actian has a long history in the data integration space, we would be remiss if we didn't include with Actian Avalanche connectors to commonly encountered data sources. So Avalanche comes with a pre-built set of connectors, and what I've called out here on the slide are 4 of the ones that we most commonly encounter as people are moving to cloud, and so that would be Salesforce, NetSuite, ServiceNow, and Workday, right? So as you are employing a broader cloud strategy, one of the things that people commonly want to do is to pull the data from these SaaS applications into Avalanche and then join it with, it may be that it's the supply chain data that they have, or it might be a customer 360 project. They've got the ability to pull data from those sources into Avalanche, and these pre-built connectors are delivered with Avalanche, right? So I called out just some of them. If you wanted a longer list of the connectors we support, it's everything, right? So it might be, Oracle sitting on-premise under an SAP solution, I mean, whatever it is. I'm fairly certain that Actian, in our integration portfolio, has access to it. And, we will work with customers to identify what is their data latency requirements. So for some customers that we talk to, they're okay having the data fed from these solutions every 15 minutes or every hour. But we do deal with customers on a case-by-case basis. There isn't a one-size-fits-all when it comes to data integration solutions. And so we'll work with you to meet your requirements there. So the next thing is, when we're making this shift to delivering a service availability is something that's really important. So when you go back to the Actian Avalanche console, and what I've circled here is at the very bottom of the screen, right? We have the ability to come in and take a look at the Avalanche status. So when we click on that, the text there that says Avalanche status, it brings us into a screen that shows us all of the services that make up Actian Avalanche that are supporting the deployment. And what you can see in there is service availability, our uptime percentage, which is very impressive right now. If we have any scheduled maintenance, right, so maybe we're planning to make some upgrades within the environment, and we'll notify you as to when that maintenance is being scheduled for, so that you have the ability to plan around that, or to engage with us and say, actually, that's a window that really doesn't work for me. I'd appreciate if you could move that maintenance window around a little bit. We'll work with you on all of that. We also have the ability through this service status window to provide you with, news as to what's going on, and announcements will show up there. And this is all refreshed in real time. So that's something that's globally available. You don't have to be an Avalanche subscriber to see that information. You can come in and take a look at it. So what does Actian Avalanche actually do for you? So if you look in the blue box here, these are all of the things that Actian's taking care of that you no longer have to worry about, right? So what we're enabling is the ability for you to focus on your business and how your business is differentiated, and to give the responsibility for managing that analytics platform over to Actian. We've a long history in managing these environments, and we have a global customer base that has bet their business on Actian technologies, on Actian services and support staff, and we have amazing customer loyalty, right? So it's something we do really well, and we've been doing it for a really long time. So we take all all of that work away from you so you can focus on business innovation. And as I mentioned earlier, getting to production is incredibly fast because once you deploy that cluster, right, that infrastructure is there and ready to use, and it's a production-capable environment. So it's up to you then to load your data and to start querying it. So we really have taken an approach that we're the experts in this area, give responsibility for managing this environment to us, and then you just focus on what you do best. So that really is the premise behind Actian Avalanche. In terms of needing help, we kind of fall into two broad categories here. So we have those that will opt for the marketplace offering of Actian Avalanche, where we have a community support that's provided there, and the Actian support staff monitor the forums that you may use to pose questions, and you can interact with other community users on there. And then with the enterprise version of Actian Avalanche, we provide enterprise support. So that's the 24/7 follow the sun support that you would expect for any enterprise deployment of your analytics environment. So we've built out on the community portal a number of knowledge-based documents. You want to take a look at, how do I connect this particular tool to Avalanche, or how do I achieve this particular capability using Avalanche? All of those knowledge-based documents are there, and as questions come up, the first time we'll answer it, we'll turn that answer into a knowledge-based document so that we don't have to answer it again. You'll be able to find that through a self-service search. That's what people, in my experience, most people that are working with the analytics environment kind of want to be able to help themselves and to find the answers themselves. As I mentioned earlier, the software downloads are available, the documentation, the how-to videos, the knowledge base, all of that is available to you. And we also actually have a GitHub repository. So as we come across little pieces of open source capabilities that we build out, we'll make those broadly available through the Actian GitHub. And I mentioned earlier, this 24/7 multilingual follow the sun support, really important for supporting mission critical enterprises. So if we move forward, we're going to go a little bit deeper into the technology underneath Actian Avalanche. So we at Actian, when it comes to analytics, we're known for performance, right? And the performance falls into two broad categories. So the first is the performance of loading data, right? It's so funny watching new customers come on board. They're like children on Christmas morning waiting to unwrap their present. First thing we got to do is get that data into the environment. Once the data is in the environment, the performance that we'll deliver then is actually querying and analyzing that data. When it comes to loading data, we're typically 5 and up to 30 times faster than the competition. We've got this parallelization going on, these some very clever routines for data loading that will typically come in a lot faster than the competition on data load. And then on query execution, we've measured it anything from 10 to 1,000 times faster than the alternatives. So that's something that we do incredibly well, right? Data loading and data analytics at speed, at scale, right? And that scale will come into large numbers of users, large volumes of data, and then the scale and complexity of the queries that you're writing. So Avalanche is designed for those 3 scale problems, and we do it really well. And then to the right-hand side, what you'll see here is that we've built this out for really high performance dashboarding, reporting. Ad hoc queries is something that we do phenomenally well, and we also have the ability to support data scientists and data engineers and the requirements they may have. And to the bottom of the screen, what you'll see is that we've designed it to be really simple. So you load your data and go. So you don't need to understand things like indexing requirements or building out cubes and materialized views and so on. We'll handle all of that for you. As I mentioned earlier, we have patented capabilities for updating the data without really impacting the performance of your running queries. So if you want a real-time view of the data, there's nobody that's going to perform as well as we do. To get into the some of the capabilities that Avalanche will provide on the technical side of things, we're actually very proud of the fact that we're as true to the ANSI SQL standard as we can be. As we add new capabilities into the product, we always look to what does the standard say with respect to the implementation. So very true to the SQL standard, and we at Actian are actually represented on the body that defines the SQL language. So we've got we've got SQL 2016 support built into Actian Avalanche. We're fully ACID compliant, So when you commit a transaction, all subsequent transactions are going to see the results of the transaction that was committed. So really important to us that we have the ability to support that. And you can also roll back a transaction if it hits an error, and we have the ability to roll back a transaction. And the update capability is something that we're very proud of because it really differentiates us. And when we brought Actian Vector to market first, this was a differentiator. It was a big problem for columnar databases was addressing how do we address updates to the data. Something that we did really well in the initial implementation, and when we came to Hadoop, we just stand head and shoulders above the competition. To begin with, nobody on Hadoop had the ability to do updates, and then as they tried to noodle over that problem, they came up with solutions that just resulted in abysmal performance. We looked at it with some of our competitors. Their performance dropped by 40–50% just by updating a very small subset of the data. So that was something that we did really well, and that update capability is something that's delivered as part of Avalanche. We talked about the security features that we provide, and we have a long history in supporting really critical environments where security is paramount, and we've got all of the capabilities required to support that. In the center column here, you'll see performance is what we're known for, and we continue to innovate in the area of performance, right? So it's performance of loading the data, it's the performance of running your queries. The performance of getting started is also something now that we're taking from weeks down to a matter of minutes and hours. Concurrency is something that we do very well, and we have, as I mentioned earlier, noticed that as we're talking to large enterprises, they want to provide all of the business decision makers in their environment with the tools that they need to make those decisions. So everybody gets a copy of, whether it's Tableau or Power BI, Looker or Qlik, or the tools of their choosing. They want to give people the ability to kind of drill into the data, to make their own, to write their own reports and dashboards and queries, and do that, ad hoc decisioning. So we provide the ability to support large numbers of users, and in many of our sites, we'll see thousands of active users, which will come down to tens or hundreds of concurrent queries, and we're able to handle that really well. Given our long history in supporting SQL database environments, we have a really excellent query optimizer that will take very complex and ugly queries. Typically, when you see queries that are built out in BI tools and that are built by clicking boxes, the resulting query can be really ugly, and we do a great job of first off, optimizing that query, and then secondly, making sure that we can execute it as quickly as possible. So we understand that really well. And then the last thing in here is maximizing resource utilization. So we want to be able to take full advantage of the fact that there's lots of cores in modern CPUs. Take full advantage of the fact that they have a reasonably sized cache on the chip, right? Take advantage of the RAM that's available to us, the advances in disk and I/O. So we're constantly looking at how do we innovate, how do we do something different, so that we can maximize the utilization of these resources. So you're paying for them, right? And you want to get the most out of them as possible. And then the last category in here in terms of simplicity, right? We're designing Actian Avalanche to be as simple to use as possible, and we want Actian to be the simplest company that you're doing business with. So simplicity is incredibly important for us here. So the first off is the simplicity of the environment, right? We're taking all of the complex management of a distributed database environment off your hands. As far as you're concerned, you load your data and you're ready to query it. We're delivering it on cloud economics. So I can see some of the questions coming in. They're asking, well, are you paying for compute and storage? And the answer is yes. You pay for compute and for storage. Obviously, if your data is stored, you're paying for the data that's being stored. On the compute side of things, as you can shut down the compute resources when you're not using them, and you stop paying for them when you're not using them. So we know that as you move to cloud, that's important. And we also have the ability to scale the environment to meet your business needs. So if at the end of quarter or end of year you want to scale up and add more nodes into the environment, we've got the ability to do that. The architecture is designed to be collaborative so that we can leverage other infrastructures that you may be utilizing. So maybe you're doing a lot of work with Spark. We've got the ability to plug in to what you're doing with Spark, and we have that Spark provider that's delivered with Actian Avalanche. And then open data access through our external table capability. We have the ability to register external sources as external tables within Avalanche, and then to join the data from those external tables with the Avalanche data as though they were local tables. So we've got some smarts in there where we'll do like push down. So let's say you wanted to limit the data that you were working with to a specific zip code, for instance, and we've got the ability to do that push down on the external table and only deal with the data that's relevant to solving your query. Enterprise security is something that we're very proud of and that we're very knowledgeable of when it comes to. So, broad user authentication support, extensive access control through the SQL grant statement, security auditing and security alarms. So you can audit and you can choose the level of auditing that's going on within the environment, which objects you want to audit. You can audit for success and failure, right? So maybe you want to find out that I've been attempting to do something in the environment that I shouldn't be doing. So if I've failed to access some objects because I have not been granted access to those objects, the fact that I've attempted is maybe something that's interesting to you. You also have the ability to set up security alarms. So if you wanted to trigger an alarm when somebody's doing something they shouldn't be doing, we have that ability too. We've got end-to-end encryption. So as I said earlier, all of the data at rest and data in motion is encrypted. And we also provide for column-level encryption. So if you wanted to have that extra level of security of very sensitive data, our column-level encryption gives you the ability to do that. And then data masking is something that we find a lot of people when they're dealing with in the financial services space, it's typically things like social security numbers and credit card numbers that they want to mask. And then when it comes to PII data, being able to securely mask that data is something that's really important. So as I mentioned, you can mask the data so that unauthorized users just see what you choose to expose to them. So typically for social security number, it's the last 4 digits, and then authorized users can see the raw data. So you decide who can see what. You define the masks that you set up there. In terms of how do we compare to Redshift and Snowflake when it comes to the price performance that we deliver, late last year we ran some benchmarks that showed Actian Avalanche to be over 9 times better from a price performance perspective than Snowflake. Soon after we completed our first round of benchmarking, Snowflake changed their acceptable use policy to prevent benchmarking. I don't think that's a coincidence. So we won't be able to keep you updated as to where we are with benchmarking, since the acceptable use policy says we can't do it. But what I would love for you to do is to invite us to come in and to take your data and your queries and run it in Actian Avalanche, and then whatever the incumbent or the alternatives that you might be considering are. That's something that we find is much more interesting than benchmarks, right? So a benchmark will measure how well you can run a defined set of queries, but obviously what's much more interesting to you is how do we do with your data? How do we do with your queries? How do we do with what you need to really move your business to the next level? So all of that is provided for with an engagement with Actian to do a trial of Actian Avalanche. So we have a framework that we can use and that will enable you to take a set of queries and run them against whatever sources you want, whatever targets you want, and we'd love to engage with you on that. So to get started, we have on the Actian website have a dedicated landing page. So it's www.actian.com/avalanche. And when you visit that page, I think the first thing that you'll see, because it's in a bright green box at the top of the page, is that you can get started on a free trial today, actually in the next couple of minutes, right? Actian will actually fund $500 worth of free trial. So that includes both the AWS infrastructure for you to try it out, as well as obviously the Actian Avalanche capabilities. So if you want to get started, I'd love for you to visit this page and click on that button and go through to AWS to get started. I was remiss in mentioning earlier that we have taken a multi-cloud approach. So we delivered on AWS first, but now the team is flat out working with Azure to deliver on there as quickly as we can. And then we're looking at other cloud platforms like the platform formerly known as Google Cloud Platform and others. So we are looking to deliver there as quickly as we can. But Azure is one that we see as vitally important, and we're doing a lot of work today to deliver on that as quickly as we can. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. We will have an early access program available, so people that want to sign up to kick the tires on that, we very much welcome it. Other things that are included on that landing page for Actian Avalanche include some videos that will show you one video shows you the food mart demo, and that is a market basket analysis where we show the same set of queries running in a dashboard against Actian Avalanche and against one of our unnamed competitors, and what you'll see is that we beat their stocks when it comes to performance, both in terms of data load, data updates, and actual analysis of the data. So that's a really interesting video that's on there. And there's another video that kind of does a flyby on what does it look like getting started with Actian Avalanche. So I'd love for you to visit the page to learn more about it, and to kick the tires and to engage with us in a conversation around it. So we have at this point some time to answer some of the questions that were populated during the conversation. So the first question that I have in here is it a columnar database? And yes, the database that is within Actian Avalanche is indeed a columnar database. Columnar is definitely best for analysis. Typically, the access patterns of analytic queries tend to go after columns rather than rows. What's quite differentiated in our columnar implementation is that we always treat the data as columns. So we're not trying to, storing it as columns and then treating it as rows throughout the rest of its life cycle. We're dealing with pure columnar data. Next question is, do you compress the data? And the answer is yes. We store the data compressed. We find that compression ratios are very much data dependent, but typically what we'll guide is we see about a 4 to 6 to 1 compression ratio. So when we talk about an 8 AU cluster being good for 4 terabytes of data, that's compressed data, and that will equate to anything from about 16 to 20 terabytes of raw data. The data lives its entire life cycle as a compressed vector, so it gives us great performance characteristics just by compressing the data. The next one, how do you differentiate yourself from Snowflake? So that's a great question. Snowflake have done wonderful things in the market. Really admire what they've done, the capabilities that they've built out, and it's a really great solution. Where we see Snowflake struggling is with the really large data volumes. So they're really great at the departmental level, and what they'll do is they'll sell in lots of clusters across different departments. We're much better on the enterprise level. So enterprise scale, tens to hundreds of terabytes. Before we even launched this, we made sure that we could test at a petabyte scale. So large volumes of data is something we do really well. Snowflake also, their architecture is such that they create additional compute clusters for groups of concurrent users. So typically what they'll say is that you get about an 8 concurrent users per compute cluster, and once you go beyond that 8, it'll spin up additional compute clusters. That can get really expensive, and one of the things that we've learned in the work that we've done with it is that complex queries that get broken down into constituent parts each of those constituent parts will actually take up some of the concurrency slots. So concurrency is something that we do a lot better than Snowflake. And then from a price performance perspective, as I showed earlier, we're at 9 times the throughput from a price performance perspective. So those are the things that differentiate us from Snowflake. There's a lot of commonality as well, right? The SQL support, the fact that we have the ACID compliant and so on. Those are, to me, table stakes at this level. So that's one set of differentiations, and then the other is that Actian's integration portfolio means that those connectors that are provided with Avalanche that give you the ability to pull data from the likes of Salesforce and NetSuite and ServiceNow into Avalanche to join it with the rest of the data that's in there. That's another differentiator that we have there. Next question is, do you have to create a star or a Snowflake schema? And the answer is no, you don't. We've designed this for simplicity, and we do not require that you create star and Snowflake schemas. So we will suggest you load your data and start issuing your queries. Next one is, do you have concept of lower environment? So I think this may mean below the 8 AU limit, and that's something we should talk about that. So if you want to engage with us, we can talk about that. But typically what we find is our sweet spot is in large data volumes with large numbers of users and complex queries, providing for ad hoc querying, providing for real-time analysis. That's really where our sweet spot is, and getting started with an 8 AU environment is typically what we would suggest. So that's really where we're focused, but if there was a good reason as to why we would look at a smaller environment, that's certainly something that we could talk to. The next question is, do we pay for computer storage or both? And the answer is that you pay for both. And as I mentioned earlier, you can shut off the compute when it's not in use. So that's something that can be quite attractive if your workload is kind of 9 to 5 business day use case. You don't pay for out of hours, you don't pay for weekends. So that can be quite interesting. Do we have to model the data after we load it, and do the relationships or Avalanche do it for us? So yeah, it's really simple. I mean, if you are using a modeling tool, we can certainly work with that. But no, this is designed for simplicity, so you don't need to worry too much about that. And then the last one here is, what's the licensing model or the pricing model? So we charge per AU. Which is the Avalanche unit. As I mentioned, an Avalanche unit is good for managing about a half a terabyte of compressed data. And if you visit the marketplace, that $500 free trial offer that we have, and when you go in there, you'll see that the cost per AU is dependent upon the region that you choose. I mean, Amazon charges us different prices per region, so you can take a look at there and very quickly calculate what it is that you will require. So I believe that was it to the end of the questions. So I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to today's presentation. There were some great questions in there, and certainly when I repeat this material, I'll spend a little more time explaining some of the concepts that you had to ask questions on. But I really appreciate you joining us today, and I would love for you to take us up on that free trial offer and to visit www.actian.com/avalanche. And to try it out for yourselves. If you want to engage with us on a proof of concept or an evaluation, do send an email to eval, that's E-V-A-L, short for evaluation, eval@actian.com, and we'll get right back to you with one of our SEs who'd love to talk to you about what it is that you'd like to do in terms of the evaluation of our technology. So thank you very much for your time today. I greatly appreciate it, and we look forward to engage with you in the future.